The arrival of The Dark Knight Strikes Again was somewhat of a death. It was met with denial and anger, and to this day most people remain at this stage. By some, its flaws were bargained under the guise of irony. Depression hit others and made them reconsider Miller's entire career. Even fewer learned to accept it. That said, it's due for reconsideration. Not an aesthetic one, for that you should look at people like Shanti Collins for example, but a thematic one. I won't say it's a good book, other than in some aesthetic sense, but it's a comic very much worth studying.
Picture this!
The US is run by a fat, brutish, vile businessman. He is aided by nefarious and amorphous foreign superpowers with a vested interest in keeping out refugees from a dying land. Information is untrustworthy. You could even say the news are fake. The media is polarized and partisan to the point of caricature. An anonymous figure runs around assaulting people with a grin on its face, claiming to do it as a joke. San Francisco is an insta-surf techno-dystopia. That's the US Miller envisioned, and it's prescient. The only difference is that Luther isn't ashamed of his lack of hair, and like the aliens. It certainly isn't the only work of fiction that managed to peek into the future, but the way in which it does it offers unique insight into the conditions that brought us here. It even has some misguided solutions, but we'll get to that. Every day, we are sifting through chunks of information, coming and entering our field of vision, jumping from a story thread to another, exploring a network of images and signs mediated by technology, sometimes without any reference to reality. Even as early as in 1988, when the issue wasn't as exacerbated as it's now, Jean Baudrillard, in his book America, describes this phenomena as an ecstasy of communication and talks about the individual as a pure screen of pure absorption and reabsorption of the influent networks. The medium of the comic book, with its textual and pictorial means of expression, with its fragmentary representations, is a good fit for portraying the way we interact with the world at this point. And Miller stretches his layouts, his storytelling, to accommodate this constant interference. The Dark Knight Returns was clearly structured on a 4x4 grid with information elegantly presented. On the other hand, in The Dark Knight Strikes Again, there is a play between chaos and order, jumbled up layouts seeking a form, a structure, something to cling on. Look for instance at puny Jimmy Olsen held in the giant silhouetted hand of Batman. There's not a unifying underlying scaffold, rather a network of signs, some bearing more weight than others, gravitating around the stronger ones. Images reacting to other images, gaining their meaning not from what they represent, but from how they're exchanged. In The Dark Knight Returns, TV news or talk shows were used with precision to deliver expositional information or to color the world, and they were clearly marked. Here, such scenes formally invade the main narrative, at many times without any discernible function. There's a complete oversaturation of information and the breaking down of barriers between what's happening and what's represented, but the rabbit hole goes much further than mere formal organization of information. There are two deep and deeply linked thematic concerns in The Dark Knight Strikes Again. First, immateriality. Holograms and other immaterial constructs are featured proeminently in the narrative. This is how the characters communicate, this is how they fight, this is how they present themselves. The president himself being a hologram is a key point in the story. Light and sound become reality. Then there's the disconnect between who the characters are and who they appear to be, appearing in the most literal sense of the word, since in superhero comics, symbolism is identity. Bridging the gap between the two teams are the four shape-shifting characters, especially the Joker who is not the Joker. Then, Catwoman is not Selina Kyle but Carrie Kelly, the former Robin. Lex Luthor bears little resemblance to his canonical appearance. So is the case for Brainiac. Flash doesn't have his old costume. The Martian Manhunter is reduced to a stereotypical Brooklyn thug, more reminiscent of Marv than anything else. The DC universe, as portrayed here, is not only twisted but also untrustworthy, and it would be a mistake to dismiss it all simply as Miller's failure to portray the characters as how they should be. This is not an accident, this is not the case of Miller simply forgetting how to draw or write anything other than characters like the Kingpin or those from Sin City. There are scenes of old-school adventure, of tender graphic virtuosity, of faithful canonical representation that should disprove this. These aren't the characters as they should be, because the world, the real world, isn't as it should be. Lynn Varley's coloring brings all of this in the realm of technology and artificiality. It's glitchy, unconventional, and unabashedly digital. For the most part, Varley and Miller don't even bother to pretend that they're representing reality. In fact, they're creating a simulacra in the Baudrillardian sense, an image that bears no relation to any reality whatever. By creating this world on the cusp of hyperreality, Miller and Varley bring us into the state of mind of the contemporary subject, of whom Baudrillard says that exists in a state of terror which is characteristic of the schizophrenic, an over-proximity of all things, a foul promiscuity of all things which beleaguer and penetrate him. In spite of himself, the schizophrenic is open to everything and lives in the most extreme confusion. This confusion is at the heart of The Dark Knight Strikes Again. It informs its storytelling, its themes, its conflict. The wish fulfillment, the power fantasy it offers, isn't that of justice, but of someone using the conditions of the hyperreality to make things right again, to make things true again. The comic is acutely aware of the relationship between symbolism and identity, and especially of the power of symbolic capital to shape the real. Batman's whole goal in The Dark Knight Strikes Again is to incite an accumulation of forgotten superheroic imagery, releasing it as a revolution against the rulers. Now, as a contemporary subject, as a postmodern man himself suffering under the simulacra, Miller wishes to escape it, but the chosen ways are problematic. Firstly, because he appears to treat the simulacra more as a place and not as an immaterial way in which humans relate with one another, with their knowledge, with their capacity for knowledge, and their language. There are evocations of a past era when things were right, or as Baudrillard would put it, when the real is no longer what it used to be, nostalgia assumed its full meaning. There is a proliferation of myths of origin and signs of reality, of second-hand truths, objectivity, and authenticity. A recurring motif is that of the relationship between the young and the old. Young heroes are respectful and enchanted of the old, even when it's not reciprocated. Young villains, on the other hand, deride, mock, and kill the old heroes. There's an understanding that the good old times aren't coming back exactly as they were, but most of the characters' actions are fueled by the creed that the future must be guided by people and principles originating from back when things were great. Secondly, because of his confusion, by not understanding his condition, Miller pathologizes aspects of the simulacra, symptoms if you will, and revolts against them. Looking at his caricatures, especially of those of women, brings to mind Prison Planet type drivel.
Why is popular culture so contrived, plastic, empty, meaningless? Pop culture has become significantly more vacuous and obscene. Sexual imagery we're bombarded with by television is infinitely more gratuitous than it was just 25 years. The mainstreaming of paedophilia. Famous used to require having actual talent. Vulgarity has replaced talent. The more vulgar and ostentatious, the better.
So let's recapitulate. We're having nostalgia for a greater past, worship of authority, vilification of youth and of new ways of being, hate for women and their sexuality. This directs his anger and his energies towards unproductive areas and makes the revolution he calls for to become, dare I say, fascistic. At the very least, it would just reproduce the issues it seeks to supplant. Searching for that firm hand to hold him and guide him back to reality, he would give the world to a brutish businessman aided by foreign superpowers. He would accept the use of disinformation and bribery and blackmail if it's for the right cause. Might makes right. His examples of authenticity, of reality, of the referent are in fact examples of power and monumentality. Of course, at face value, in The Dark Knight Strikes Again is not portrayed as such. It remains just a fantasy of regeneration through violence.